Hello and welcome to my channel. My name is Joe, and I finished a match against Elves a little earlier this evening, and I'm going to go through the replay here. Looking at my opening hand, it's pretty solid, a little land heavy, but 4 lands, 3 creatures is usually a keep as long as the creatures are decent, and they are. If you look across the table, the elf opponent has 2 lands, no mana dorks, an Eternal Witness, Lead the Stampede, Elvish Visionary, Archdruid, Chord of Calling. A little clunky for elves. Hard for me to say. With my experience, I would probably mulligan this. It's just really sort of slow without any ramp. It could easily just go sort of turn 1, don't play anything. Turn 2, play Guiltleaf Palace and play Elvish Visionary. You know, these are not inspiring first turns for an elf deck. So let's see. I'm going to keep. Let's see if the opponent keeps. He does. And I start on the play. Put Oboro out. Opponent draws another 2-drop, not a Mana Dork, which would have been ideal. I draw an Ether Vial, but with all my lands in hand, it's definitely better to play out a Lord here instead of playing Ether Vial. So there he is, and there's no creatures yet for Harbinger to bounce, so that guy will lay in wait. You can see that my opponent is also testing Seagate Wreckage. So Guiltleaf Palace and Elvish Visionary. Just as I said, really terrible first couple turns for Elves. Master of Waves, going to help make my board presence sort of crazy explosive in exactly 1 turn from now. Okay, so I play out the Merfolk, making my guys bigger, and attack with the Lord. This guy seems to be having trouble accurately adjusting his life total. There he goes, he gets it down to 17, and I pass the turn. Opponent has drawn a 3rd land in Seagate Wreckage, so he can play that out, but still hasn't ramped at all. Taps his 3 lands. He has a lot of choices here. Elvish Champion can make his Visionary bigger and give it Force Walk, but he chooses to go with the Elvish Archdruid here. Okay, for my turn, with a 4th land and Merfolk on the table, I'm going to opt to play the land, cast Master of Waves, use Merfolk to tap the Elvish Visionary. I don't want to give him any chances at chump blocking, even though I doubt he would, since Elvish Archdruid requires a high density of elves to produce a lot of mana. I'm only going to leave him his Archdruid to block with if he wants to. And with both of my guys 3/3s, he's not going to want to do that. You don't want to chump with one of the best creatures in your deck. Master Wave enters, and he brings 4 elementals with him. I'm going to swing with these guys for 6, taking the opponent down to 11 and pass the turn. You'll notice that I'm not indicating the current power and toughness of my creatures. I've decided to give that a go on Cockatrice and sort of see how it feels. Let me pause this for a second and explain myself. Cockatrice, to my mind, is one of the closest things to actual paper magic, since there's no automation. And in real life, I wouldn't put little counters or something on my lords once they have sort of a pumping effect from the other ones. So Lord of Atlantis to my opponent still looks like a 2/2, and if he wants to treat him like a 2/2, you know, that's his right. I don't want to stop him. I don't want to take away his God-given right to not read my cards. To pause this for 1 more second, also, playing without actually typing out the power and toughness just sharpens my brain as far as calculating power and toughness really quickly on my board. For example, it's 3, 3, 4 plus 2 times 8 is 18, right? 3 plus 3 is 6, plus 4 is 10, 12, 14, 16, 18. Really important to be able to process those numbers quickly. Okay, so the opponent plays a Dwynen's Elite. He has elves on the board, so that brings an Elf Warrior along. Heritage Druid with his last land allows him to start tapping elves for mana. So we see some of the famous elf explosiveness now, but on turn 4, it's quite possibly too late. The opponent is clearly thinking very carefully about this sequence. If you haven't noticed already, Harbinger has a really delicious target here in Elvish Archdruid. Bouncing this guy is an insane tempo play against Elves because it takes a turn once he hits the table for him to actually be able to produce mana. So if I bounce him when he's tapped, the opponent has to play him again. So let's just pause this for a second. So the opponent has chosen not to tap his guys and play stuff out and use Archdruid this turn. What could he have done? He has Collected Company, Lead the Stampede, and Court of Calling. If he had tapped Archdruid for 5 mana, could have played Collected Company. That would most likely have put 2 Elves on the table, which would have made 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. He could have then tapped 3 more Elves, played, or just all 6 in Court of Calling for Izuri, or something like that. But I guess he figures that Court of Calling and Collected Company are both instant speed effects, so why not leave them for my turn? Okay, so I untap, go ahead to my draw step, I hit a Spreading Seas, which is interesting with the Lord on the table, and I have to think a little bit about sequencing. I have Regery to combo with Harbinger, and that to me seems like a good place to start the turn, to sort of force the issue with the opponent generating mana on the Archdruid. So I'm going to fast forward a little bit here. Okay, thinking a lot about the sequence. Go ahead, tap my 2 islands. Regery is going to target the Archdruid to tap. The opponent's going to think in response, but ultimately realize that he has to tap his creature. So he taps him and adds 5 mana to his mana pool. Okay, and then taps Visionary to cast a Court of Calling with X equals 3. So we'll fast forward. He grabs Izuri from his deck, shuffles his library, Court of Calling goes to the graveyard, and Harbinger's going to go ahead and enter the battlefield and bounce the Archdruid. Now that's really important with Izuri on the table because the opponent won't have access to tons of mana with the Archdruid next turn. Go ahead and follow up with Spreading Seas on the Guiltleaf Palace. Now black-green Elves run Shaman of the Pack, so if possible, it's always great to take them off of their limited black mana sources. If you look around at this point in the hand and on the table, the opponent now has 0 access to black mana. Okay, so we played Spreading Seas, and I believe I drew another Lord here. So go ahead, and with Island Walk, I attack with Merfolk and Master of Waves for 7, taking the opponent down to 4, which because of his difficulties processing the life total will take a little while about it. Alright, now he's going to untap. I've got plenty of blockers. Elves typically doesn't pack a lot of removal. He has found another black source, but if we look, he doesn't have anything to cast that costs black mana. Opponent is going to think very carefully about his sequence. And with Island Walk online, he has to feel like his back is up against the wall. He starts with Lead the Stampede, which costs 3 mana. It's a sorcery. It's a very powerful spell. If we look over here, look at the top 5 cards of your library. You may reveal any number of creature cards from among them and put the revealed cards into your hand. Put the rest on the bottom of your library in any order. Now, Elves is a deck, I know from experience, that plays over 30 creatures in the deck. Or, just about 30 creatures, depending on how many Collected Companies in Court of Calling and Lead the Stampede you play. Most lists that I'm familiar with sort of play either Lead the Stampede for resilience, or they play Court of Calling for the sort of silver bullet quality of this card. This guy appears to be running a split of all 3, so who knows how many of each he has. But on this Lead the Stampede, he's revealed 3 powerful Elves, but facing down so much power with an Island Walk Lord on the table, the opponent, again, has to feel a lot of pressure. Even with Shaman resolving, he's going to max out around 6, 7, 8 damage. So goes ahead and starts with Nettle Sentinel. He's going to put the other 2 into his hand. He did draw Reclamation Sage, so he could start by generating 3 mana and destroying the Spreading Seas, but without creatures to block and his life total at 4, it's not going to be enough. So he chooses to go with Eternal Witness, no more mana floating. and he's going to get back Chord of Calling, start tapping his lands and creatures. So far he's got 2, 3, I believe 4, and he's thinking about it. So this is currently x equals 2. And ultimately, if I remember correctly, I think that the opponent scoops this one. Untaps all his lands, thinking about his plays. A lot of pressure. I tell him, take your time, no rush. And think back to when we had our opening hands, and I said the opponent had 2 lands with no acceleration and an Elvish Visionary, and that was exactly his opening. Turn 1, land, go. Turn 2, land, Visionary. That's really not what Elves wants to do, and as it turns out, after having bounced his Elvish Archdruid, Izuri has sort of nothing to do, and I think the opponent chooses to scoop. So that was game 1. Solid game for Merfolk. Really slow game for Elves. Let's go ahead and see how game 2 went. Fast forward to the opening hands. I have a 1-lander on the draw. The opponent has an Overgrown Tomb and a Seagate Wreckage. And he's got his 3 mana dorks, access to black mana for Shaman of the Pack, Battle Sentinel. Nothing super powerful, but he can easily draw into that, and this is a pretty nice start. He can play turn 1, Tomb into Llanowar Elf, turn 2, land, tap these 2, play these 2. If he draws another green land, he can play yet another creature. So at the end of turn 2, he could easily have, let's see, I guess 3 creatures on the table, or potentially 4 creatures on the table. So the opponent chooses to keep, and I think pretty hard about this. Now, this is a little embarrassing. I've been testing a theory that when I'm on the draw with 1 land, especially if it's an island, if I have 2 card draw spells in hand, any land at all that I hit in the deck, Mutavault, Seagate Wreckage, Cavern of Souls, whatever, will turn these card draws online and allow me to start hitting more lands to play the rest of my hand. I have, through experience, this is, I think, one of the last straws that is going to break the camel's back. Without Aether Vial, it's a really hard sell to keep a 1-land hand. If it's on the draw and I have something like 3 Silver Gills, I might keep it. If it's on, now, Spreading Seas, you have to realize, is frequently not very not as strong, I should say, against a deck like Elves as it is against a deck like, for example, Jund or Abzan, because they have access to so many other sources of mana, right? So I take him off of Overgrown Tomb, but he still floods his board out with a bunch of mana dorks, and I haven't really screwed his mana at all. Spreading Seas, however, is a creature. It's going to always be good for pushing damage. So a hand with an island on the draw with something like 2 or 3 Silver Gills, I might be tempted to keep, but in retrospect, I feel that this was a bad keep. Now, you might think, and I've said in the past, if I get my next draw step and I whiff, I get another draw step, a running draw step, before my second turn's main phase, which means 2 consecutive draws gives me close to a 60% chance of hitting a land. Now, that sounds pretty good, but even if I do hit a land, I'm still only going to have access to 2 lands. Now, I've got a lot of spells in my hand that I want to be able to play out. I don't have an Aether Vial, and so I don't have that acceleration. Of course, I could top deck an Aether Vial, but we really don't want to plan on that since there's only 4 of them in the deck. So, thinking about it a little bit deeper, say we do hit our land on our first draw step. We go ahead, play a Silvergill adept, but the next card is another Island Walk Lord, but we only drew, say, a Seagate Wreckage or a Mutavault. Next turn, draw a Master of Waves, and still sitting on those 2 lands, 1 blue, 1 colorless. Can't play out my Island Walk Lord, can't play out my Tidebinder Mage, can't play out my Harbinger of the Tides. So, it's really sketchy keeping these 1-landers without Aether Vial, is what I'm saying. As I mentioned, I decide to keep it. The opponent starts, as I said, with Overgrown Tomb and Elvish Mystic, going down to 18 life. I top deck Seagate Wreckage, so I will be able to play one of these 2 spells, but my mana still has a pretty good chance of getting slowed down slowing down my development because I'll need to top deck running lands to be able to effectively hit my curve. So the opponent played a Seagate Wreckage, tapped Overgrown Tomb and Seagate Wreckage to play Visionary, and tapped Mystic to play Llanowar Elf. Drew in to lead the Stampede, which is great for filling up his hand. I drew an Aether Vial, which is pretty slow, but knowing that I'm short on mana, I go ahead and deploy the Aether Vial here. The opponent continues to draw little guys, so he goes ahead and plays Nettle Sentinel and Heritage Druid. It's a solid combo. 3 mana, and is going to start with Mystic, which untaps Nettle Sentinel. He's got 2 mana floating since the Mystic only costs 1, and he generated 3 off of the Heritage Druid. He'll go ahead and tap the other 3 now, moving his mana up to 5. Doesn't have access to black right now, but he can cast Lead the Stampede, untap Nettle Sentinel, and still have 2 mana floating. Looking at the top 5 cards of his library, he reveals a Nettle Sentinel, a Reclamation Sage, and an Elvish Archdruid. Now the Reclamation Sage is extremely unfortunate because it's going to take us off our Aether Vial and pretty much put the brakes on my entire development. The opponent thinks briefly and realizes, the best play is clearly to destroy my Aether Vial. It was a risky keep. I got lucky drawing into a land in an Aether Vial, and we're going to see how keeping a 1-land hand can screw you. So the opponent untaps. I threw Spreading Seas out because he's got so many creatures anyway that 1 blocker is not going to do a big difference. Plays out a 2nd Nettle Sentinel, plays out a 3rd Nettle Sentinel, taps the 3 of them, plays an Archdruid. He's going to untap all 3 Nettle Sentinels. 1 of them is available to attack, and with Archdruid pumping all of his guys, he can attack here for 12. He's got 2 3/3s and 3 2/2s. That's 6 plus 6. Hitting me really hard in the face. Go down to 8, untap, draw an island. Again, I'm sort of fortunate to draw land, but it doesn't help me catch up to that insane elf action. So we're going to move to the 3rd game and see how this interesting match concluded. Opening hands, let's check them out. Let's start with the Elves here. Opponent is on 0 lands. That's going to be a mulligan. I have 2 lands, including a Mutavault and a blue source. Aether Vial. Actually, I have 3. Oboro, Minamo, Mutavault. Which, playing against a green deck, I note to myself, is great because it's extremely resistant to choke. Aether Vial for acceleration, and some of our best creatures in this matchup. Silvergill to draw more gas. Tidebinder Mage to lock down mana accelerators. Harbinger of the Tides to bounce any guys that are unfortunate enough to be tapped. So I'm on the play. I'm going to let the opponent know that I keep. It's a clear mulligan for him. We can see that he brought choke in. That's very interesting to note. He's going to look at the top card of his library, implying that it's a keep, and stops looking. So he left the top card on the top of his library. Play Minamo, play Aether Vial. He has to be thinking this choke isn't as good as he thought it might be. So, opponent, let's see. Plays Guiltleaf Palace and Elvish Mystic. During my upkeep, I put Aether Vial on 1 counter. Draw another land. Not amazing. Now, I thought a fair bit on this turn. You can see this gap in my play. Lots of options here. Now, option 1, sort of the most obvious, I think, is to play the Tidebinder out, lock the Mystic down, and slow the opponent's development down. Now, nothing wrong with that line. It's really good. It's a great tempo play. It gets a 2/2 on the board, slows the opponent's development down, takes one of his creatures out as a potential blocker or potential attacker. Now, you have to remember that during the game, I didn't have any information about his hand. So, option 1, play out Tidebinder Mage, tap down his Elvish Mystic, and pass the turn. Option 2, though, Option A, option B. So option B is to play Silvergill, draw a card, get more information in order to develop sort of a more appropriate strategy, a more accurate strategy in the 3rd and subsequent turns. And with Aether Vial on 2 next turn, I have to assume the opponent is going to tap this Mystic to to play out more stuff from his hand. He will then be an easy target for Harbinger to bounce, and if he uses the Mystic and his other two mana sources to ramp into an Archdruid, then I can use the Tidebinder Mage to lock down an Archdruid, and that's going to be much, much better than just locking down a Mystic. So in the end, I thought that we have no pressure right now on us, and so why not run out the Silver Guild, draw a card, and leave these two really potent cards for next turn when we'll have Aether Vial on 2 and the opponent will have developed his board a little bit more. I have to say it makes me really happy to see that opponents are bringing in Choke from the sideboard, and I am very solidly prepared. I specifically didn't play out my island that turn because I was wary of the opponent ramping into Choke. So let's fast forward through this dead air. So again, after thinking for a little while, I went ahead, played the Silvergill, and revealed the Harbinger. So I didn't have many choices. The Tidebinder Mage has a greater impact, I think, in this matchup than the Harbinger. So let the opponent know about the Harbinger, and now after I play it, I drew another one. He won't have the information that I have yet another one in my hand. Okay, so we played the Silvergill, drew a card. Opponent untaps, taps Guiltleaf Palace. He's going to continue his ramp and plays out 2 more mana dorks. Now this is reasonable because on my turn I can go ahead and bounce his dork and then tap down another one. So put Aether Vial on 2, and I drew another Tidebinder Mage, so we can see that I'm hitting sort of nothing but gas this game. If we move forward a little bit, I chose to play Mutavault this turn because it can be an attacker next turn if need be. Start with Harbinger of the Tides, bounce the Mystic, and I'm going to attack with the Silvergill here. If he chooses to block with one of his dorks, then I'll just Tidebind the other one, and he will have sort of no mana acceleration. But he takes the 2 damage, goes down to 18. And in the second main phase, I'm going to use Aether Vial to put out the Tidebinder Mage and lock down his Elvish Mystic. I do this now to prevent him from generating any mana on his turn with the Mystic. Aether Vial on the main phase is sometimes correct. Okay, so limiting the opponent's mana, slowing down his development. He cracks a fetch to get an Overgrown Tomb, draws into a great card, an Elvish Archdruid, and he thinks, okay, he can get back into it, play out an Archdruid, have access to 5 mana next turn, actually 6 with this Llanowar Elf. But I have something to say about that. Alright, so I draw another Harbinger of the Tides. So at this point it's 3 Harbingers and 2 Tidebinders, and we're going to see that if we draw a lot of these guys, we actually have a really solid game against Elves. I just think a little bit about my sequencing. I tap and then untap the island, just remembering that Choke is a possibility. But I want to use my mana this turn, and I'm with Aether Vial on 2, I'm more than happy to have 1 island tapped down for my opponent to waste his turn playing Choke. Start with Harbinger of the Tides, bouncing the Mana Elf that's not being locked down by the Tidebinder, and activate Aether Vial to tap down his Archdruid. Now we had predicted a play like this earlier in the game, and it's really, really powerful because this guy is one of the Elf deck's biggest mana generators. So activate Mutavault, swing for 2 times 4, 8. The opponent is going to go down to 9. I'll hustle through the rest of my turn. And at this point, I have 2 times 5 plus 2. That's 12 damage on the board. Both of the opponent's creatures are locked down. He draws a 3rd land, but there's not much he can do here. He's going to play a Llanowar Elf and an Elvish Mystic. Realize that there's not anything he can do. If he chumped and chumped, he would be taking 8 exactly, and lose the game. Okay, so Elves is absolutely one of Merfolk's toughest matchups, but this game 3 is a really good example of, first of all, the power of Harbinger of the Tides, which most of us, well, all of us should be running a playset of him in our main deck. Modern is full of creatures, and Harbinger of Tides always has targets. And if he doesn't, he still does a good job as a 2/2. Tidebinder Mage, though, on the other hand, is insane in this matchup. So you guys saw how good he is, and hope you enjoyed it. I'll catch you in the next video. Thanks a lot, and leave comments, subscribe, and thumbs up, all that stuff. See you later.